Welcome one more day to Space in Harmonia. Excuse me, I have a bit of congestion, so I might not be speaking too clearly sometimes, but I'll make an effort. The piece of music you just listened is a composition of mine that began to flow through me, so to say, many years ago. And I chose it because it expresses something I want to convey in this message today. I gave it the name of Marching from Ancestral Ages, since it gives me the sense of being moving forward with vitality, with impetus. If you notice, the piece has some force. And I had the idea that the true carriers of light have been moving since very ancient times, crossing darkness, something for which we need strong vitality and determination because of all the dangers we find, all the accidental circumstances. And at the end of the piece of music, I improvise a little bit because in life we are also invited to improvise because there are many unpredicted situations, and obviously we have to bring something creative, something for which we need to be very well attuned to the voice of conscience, which is very creative and can elevate imagination. And today I want to give a clear vision about what's the true inner master, how we allow that master to manifest through us, and why we should distinguish between the universal master, which is also unique because it's expressed through us in unique ways, and what others call masters or even messiahs, because there have been many, but they not always have been connected to the complete vision of the truth of life. So we have to be very clear about the idea of a universal messiah, the cosmic brain, which basically brings order out of chaos, reintegrating everything into the tree of life, the original genome of life. And this implies leaving behind all sorts of delusions, addictions. And in relation to all this, at the end of the video, I'm going to explore briefly a recent vision in human science, which might change the paradigms, even quantum mechanics, because it leaves behind many old views. And it comes from a physicist, which is now retired, and he says the universe is not walking towards an inevitable death because its essence is not chaos, disorder. Entropy would not be the main dynamics, but rather the opposite. The universe is expanding faster and faster, integrating the previous stages into greater structures of order. So chaos is not predominant, but rather an exception, and order is the rule. And that's definitely a characteristic of the tree of life. The tree of life can even explain why the universe is expanding faster. Now, before going into all that, I remind you that in the other channel, Vital en Armonía, I have already published the first part exploring the 22 paths of the tree of life. The coming week, I'll be publishing the second part, and that session will finish the first module of the introductory course on soul therapy and self-discovery. And this subject of the 22 paths in the tree of life is very much connected to how the master must manifest within ourselves, which is the subject of today. And we have to remember what Master Ishu taught. Ishu was the name given to a man that manifested the essence of life. Ishu means salvation in Aramaic, Yahushua, which is another form in Hebrew, means salvation by the divine birth, the divine manifestation of superconditional love, unmodified life, integral conscience, serenity. And I basically learned that from what he said. I am the way, the truth, and the life. My serenity I give you, my serenity I leave you, because the world does not give it as I give it to you. This means he was expressing an essence, which in a sense it's also a seed that is planted in us. It activates something in ourselves and this grows. Once we allow ourselves to be the channel for that supraconditional love and unmodified life and growing, expanding conscience in serenity, then a soul begins to grow in us with those qualities. And this soul is the true image of ourselves, the true manifestation of the Holy One, which expresses the 13 aspects of the Tree of Life, the 22 paths, and somehow becomes a mediation with regard to the Absolute, because we cannot get into contact with the Absolute with our physical body or our human soul, because it would be dissolved completely. The mediator is our true divine soul, which is connected to the cosmic head, so to say, the Father of Lights. It was called Father of Lights because it emanates seeds of intelligence, logoi spermaticoi, which somehow come to the earth to unite with human souls and there generate an image in each one, and that image is the true soul. So we are somehow rescuing the human soul if we identify ourselves with that emanation from the Holy One. And basically what the man called Ishu did 2000 years ago was allowing that light fully into himself and fusing his nefesh soul, his human soul, with the Father. As he said, I go to the Father. And from there he communicated a whole wisdom and understanding about transcending life on earth. This is why those souls that are fused with the Holy One can still be connected to ourselves, because our true soul is also emanated from that source and somehow brings the essence of a particular experience like that of Master Ishu. This is why he said, I am the true vine and you are the branches. I am the true original DNA of light and life and you are the ramifications, the extensions. As long as you are allowing in yourselves that essence, which somehow is our destiny. Because even though it's universal, it's valid for everyone in every time and outside of time, it manifests differently for everyone because we are living in different situations, we have different talents. Actually, the essence of light brings gifts which are different in everyone, and developing those gifts is what constitutes the inner growth of our soul to bring light and healing into the world, allowing others to be reintegrated into the tree of life. And all this means that every time we are aligned with our perfect image, we manifest our best version, which is even more creative and original than the best versions suggested by ordinary life coaching, in which being the best version might imply manifesting competitive attitudes, being better than others, allowing pride into ourselves, and that's not the best version from the primordial point of view. Notice that when I speak of the primordial Father or the primordial essence, I'm not referring to primordial or first in a space-time, but first in terms of essence, the first fundamental reality. We can say it's first in logical and ontological terms and not chronological, existential terms. So anything that belongs to the world is destroyed, it disappears unless it is reorganized and reintegrated into the true manifestation of life, what we call the tree of life. So obviously we can integrate our human experience into our divine life, if we can express it that way. But remember that the master said, if the grain falls into the earth and dies, it gives much fruit. And he was referring to the breaking of the shell, the klipot in Hebrew. And that's when the true life, the plant, comes forth, which is exactly what happens when we allow our true soul to come forth, breaking or dissolving our false personalities, which are full of negative impulses, dark emotions, very low thoughts. Interestingly, the other day a light fellow from California made a very interesting simile comparing the cactuses to those seeds that fall by the way, by the road, in the parable of the seed. Remember how in that parable the sower goes to seed and some seeds fall by the road and they are eaten by birds. We can interpret that birds are those evil spirits and evil thoughts that take away our good intentions, our good seeds of conscience. And other seeds fell into a ground that was not too deep, and they grew a little bit, but they were scorched by the sun. And that is what happens when the light is too strong and people cannot receive it, understand it, and therefore they divert going into other directions. And other seeds fell into thorn bushes, which is very much what happens when someone is educated within the conventional culture, especially religion, developing certain aggressive attitudes. And pondering about all this, I realized that a cactus in the desert obviously thrives in conditions where life is almost absent. A desert is a place where only scorpions, snakes, lizards, insects thrive usually, and some prey birds, but there is very little life, and cactuses thrive very well. And I realize that the spikes they have are probably something developed as a response, a mechanism of self-defense, because the cactus has water inside, and many different animals might love to eat up that plant. So the spikes in those precious plants called cactuses are an indication that they want to thrive in difficult conditions. In the same way, our society is very much a desert because even though it's populated with people, and even though there are many platforms of information, internet, mobiles, TV, and so on, people feel more isolated than ever. And they also have developed self-defense mechanisms. We all have false personalities that are full of spikes, reactions, negative emotions, and negative thoughts against ourselves, against others, against the circumstances. And in some way, we are also extending our arms sometimes towards the heaven, so some love can reach us, but very rarely we experience that incoming of true love because we keep ourselves as cactuses and we cannot live like that. So I suggest that we become more like aloe vera. I don't know if you know the plant, but it also grows in the desert. And that plant has cutting edges. However, it doesn't have spikes. And it also has a very healing substance inside, the aloe vera liquid, which is used to heal the skin and to hydrate the body because it has hydrating qualities and also disinfecting qualities. Aloe vera is also a symbol of what our true essence is. It heals, but is smooth. It doesn't react negatively, even though sometimes we also need the double-edged sword of the word and discernment. Sometimes we need to separate the wheat from the chaff within ourselves, separating true thoughts from evil thoughts. We need to separate ourselves from the false in us. Sometimes we need to speak the truth aloud, and this might be painful for some people, but that's the double-edged sword of the truth. So aloe vera is a very good simile for all this. Now, in order for that to be manifested, we have to be born. Remember that we don't just express a soul fully as it is. It requires a process of gestation, and not everyone has even an embryo or a seed of soul. Some people receive the seed by listening to someone who has already been developing a true soul. Others might be connected to a true soul even since the time the human fetus was developed in the womb of the mother. And the soul connects to the soul of the baby in order to grow through the baby in later stages. I remember in my childhood experiencing moments in which something greater than my human personality was accompanying me. It was a greater mind, and I now identify that as my true inner master, my true inner self, which is actually the body, the extension of the cosmic head. It's meant to be a vessel, a vehicle of that true love, true life, integral conscience. But obviously, I'm not always attuned to that because I have a human personality to be harmonized. But I have been understanding the meaning of growing, and obviously, my soul is not a baby. It grew up to a stage in which the kid, the child, wants to understand more. And this is what the Master said: if you do not become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven, as it is translated, even though it's not a kingdom but a fundamental reality where there is completeness. And in Hebrew, we could call it Malkut Shmaya, which we can interpret as the Malkut of Atzilut, the plane of emanation. Some might say the Malkut of Beria, but that would be Malkut Hashamayim, heavens. And there is a lot to ponder in that. I mention this for those who are more familiar with that vocabulary. Remember that the sphere of Keter in one plane is the sphere of Tiferet in the following plane, which is the Malkut in the subsequent plane. So let's say that the Malkut of Atzilut is the Tiferet in Beria and the Keter in Yetzirah. In any case, we are dealing with an inner growth, So we go from a seed, embryo, fetus, baby which is born and wants religious milk, and then a man-child, a soul that begins to mature, exploring deeper this wisdom, and eventually becomes a man. But that is a stage which very few have attained. Master Ishu was the greatest example, and he fused himself with the Father. I'd say some great masters on earth attain the level of the man-child, and we are meant to become the true man-child. And notice how all this is in the New Testament. Even in chapter 12 of the so-called Book of Revelation, we find it. Even though it's not revelation, it's more an unveiling, because revelation is to veil again. Re implies repetition. So this is a trick. Language is full of witchcraft, especially religious language. So apocalypse means unveiling. And in chapter 12, we see a woman which is pregnant. She is the Adamic soul, and she carries the man-child on her womb. And this man-child is meant to be a king to rule with iron rod, but this is again a fallen religious language, because the true soul is not meant to rule as an authority on a hierarchical structure, and it doesn't use any iron rod, which is a symbol of a strict behavior of imposition. Only religious authorities use iron rods to torture people. The true soul grows with aloe vera, using the double-edged sword, and a very smooth, intelligent mind that can discern the truth from the false and dissolve the dark personality, being always safe because it cannot be twisted, it cannot be deceived. This is why it has to be born. And this has to grow as the Son of Man, the Son of Adam, which is basically what took place in some masters as the Buddha, the awakened one. Wake up, you who sleep, and the anointed one will enlighten you. This was said by Paulo, which somehow perceived the truth, even though his teaching mixed up with old Christianity, which was very ancient by that time, and the message was distorted with the confusions of religion. And now it's very difficult to separate the truth from the false, because people are so deceived by doctrines of the world that very few will be able to grasp this message, this alive message. But this is what happens in the desert. Some seeds are eaten by the birds. And obviously, to experience this gestation and birth, we have to feed the kid when that divine mind is asking for understanding. So if you feel drawn to this teaching, it means you already have a child that wants solid food. It's not distracted with religious milk. And this is very important, because the mind has to be expanded. And remember when the Master said, if you are not born from the water and the Spirit, you shall not enter the kingdom of God, as it is translated, even though we can use the expression Malkut Eloi, and this would correspond to the Tiferet in Atzilut. So it's an even greater stage. And notice how being born from the water is to wash away false personalities, listening to the voice of conscience, looking inside recognizing, acknowledging our defects, and turning to the true life in ourselves. Whereas being born from the Spirit is to receive the breath of understanding, the neshama, which is a spirit, and also the life, the haya, which is the consort, the husband of that neshama. Adam was a nefesh haya, a vital soul, but that soul lost the true life because it became a naked consciousness trapped in animal bodies, and that's what we have inherited. We don't feel the true life and tenderness of the heart because we are disconnected from true life most of the time. So, becoming true sons of the living one is a process of remembering, living the truth within, with an elevated knowing that Elion, which is conscience, not simply knowledge, intellectual data, or mere understanding of things, or even wisdom alone, because wisdom gives us the sense of what to do, how to do it, but we don't necessarily understand it or have access to the sphere of conscience. When we have wisdom and understanding, we can enter the sphere of conscience, but this is something new. It's not the result of uniting both. And notice how experiencing that conscience is the very act of salvation itself, reintegrating chaos into order, dissolving all chaos. Because we don't want to keep disorder, shadow, suffering. We want to transform it. We are not integrating the shadow into our soul, into our true light, but rather transforming it. Some teachings say we have to integrate the shadow, but in any case, we have to integrate it in a context of meaning. Now, this process of birth might not be accomplished in one lifetime, and this is why the original soul is connected to several lifetimes, timelines. I have actually watched other versions of Fernando, of myself, and in two of them, I have seen that Fernando didn't live more than 30 years, more or less. And if I'm living longer in this one, it might be because I'm fulfilling my mission. When we have a soul, even if it's an embryo, we have a plan, an image to bring forward. So we have something to do. And this is essential for the growth of the soul. But we have to be intelligent enough to integrate this order into conditions of meaning, of order, where the shadows can dissolve and thus allow true love and true life flow through us. And this is very much connected to a vision which has been now suggested by a physicist which is retired. He's called Julian Barbour. He's from England. And he said that the universe is not walking towards chaos, towards entropy, but rather expanding in a dynamic that integrates disorder, chaos, into more and more complex structures of order. So energy spreads out, but it doesn't become more and more chaotic. It simply reorganizes itself. And this is a way of denying completely the laws of thermodynamics and even aspects of the quantum mechanics. Just to give you an idea, the first law of thermodynamics says that energy cannot be neither created nor destroyed, it is simply transformed. Energy goes from one state to the other. For instance, energy in the water becomes vapor, and in that process, something happens, which is connected to the second law. And this says that in every work action, which is basically energy, there is a loss of heat, a loss of energy. because they think the universe is like a machine. So this would imply the universe eventually would end up in a complete chaos, coldness, because the heat is disappearing. But this is not what this physicist is saying. The opposite is taking place. Now, the third law of thermodynamics says that in the mechanical work of the universe, there would always be a remnant of heat. So, absolute zero would not be the ultimate condition. So, the state of chaos would imply some energy spread somehow, which is a very sad cosmovision, and it doesn't make sense because the universe is not a machine. The universe is not made up of pieces, mechanisms. That view emerged with the Industrial Revolution at the end of the 18th century and even developed further in the 19th century. And I think science keeps working in those rotten old views because there are political and economic interests. There are many quantum computers being developed. There are still quantum plants to produce quantum energy, a good way to make money for them. And it's difficult. Science adopts the point of view, the tree of life, but I think there might be a new paradigm in the horizon. It is compatible with the holographic paradigm, in my view. And this physicist, Julian Barbour, wrote a book called The Janus Point because he compares the situation of the universe to the god Janus, which has two faces. And it's because he says the universe is walking in two directions. There is chaos, but it is reintegrated into greater structures of order. And I think some neo-Gnostics are going to be very happy about this vision because they suggest the evolutionary emergence in which consciousness is an energy that emerges from more and more complex situations in the universe. And for them, this would be the explanation of how the universe is becoming God. There is not an absolute father source somewhere, not even a demiurge, which does evil in the universe, as the Gnostics used to think. And they are shifting into this perspective, which is somehow compatible with that new view. However, I think there is a mistake in that evolutionary emergence because consciousness doesn't come from matter. Consciousness precedes matter. It's actually pure light. And what physicists consider as matter is a condensation of primordial light. So it's the other way around. And by the way, Timothy Frick is one of the neo-Gnostics that suggests how the Christ is the same in all traditions. But this is because a very important distinction is not being made. One thing is the consciousness that emerges from matter, from the elevation of serpent energy, the so-called brain enlightenment. And a very different event is when the primordial light of conscience somehow gets activated, gets into contact with a human soul in a human body in material conditions, because that's a different source. We can call it the universal Messiah, the original true master, which doesn't come from matter. We speak of a primordial source, the Father of Lights, which has an emanation of energy, the dwelling, the Shekinah, which becomes actually matter, but that comes in later stages. The ontological essence of reality cannot come from something limited as matter. It's unlimited, but it can become limited conditions. Anyway, this is something to be understood within. It cannot be the result of an intellectual theory. So the key is to express the personality of the Holy One. In a single act of conscience, we can gulp all the oceans in the universe because the whole universe is inside us. And I think for now it's enough information. Thank you very much to all those who have encouraged me to continue publishing these videos. A few people told me these are very helpful for them. And even though the channel has very few followers, I think it's part of my mission. In a sense, this also helped me to overcome certain blockages, to get out of the comfort zone. Otherwise, I would be putting more attention on the channel of music or the other channel, Vital and Harmonia, where I'm focusing more on specific areas. But thank you again for watching. If this was helpful, give thumbs up, make comments and questions if you wish. And until the next time, let's keep opening the heart so that the true essence of unconditional love and modified life, integral conscience, and serenity can keep flowing through us.